Hey friends, so I just want to do a quick little review here of this how can I do more DPS on bosses in AQ40 as a Fury Warrior, and talk about my thoughts as a raid leader of AQ40 when I see a video like this. I agree with a lot of what is said here. Some of the things in here I didn't totally um, vibe with, and then after doing more research on it, I'm like, oh, that makes sense, like we'll talk about later. Um, but some other things I can tell you, for example, here, we're going to talk about Skeram to start. And since this video has been posted from ATD, there has likely been some percentage increase in wipes in AQ40 on Skeram. I'm just confident of it with what is explained here. Some of the advice is really good as far as positioning, not cleaving down each other with cleave, when to use intercept. You don't want to be intercept in, you want to have intercept when the boss splits up. Really good advice. But what's important to understand about Scarum as a DPS warrior is you're really griefing if you only kill the real one. I want to give the context here that this is the number one speedrun. We reviewed the number one speedrun, right? This is not average gameplay. This is you at the start he says this is my thoughts when I'm going in and maybe you can pick something up. So he's instantly switching off and going to the real ones always because he says, "Oh, I don't want to go to the fake ones that only have 25k health." Well, the problem is in an average raid, if everyone only kills the real guy, then you're going to get so many ads here that spawn that your raid is going to wipe. I just promise you. There's more mind controls that happen because of that. It just gets out of control. People don't kick. He doesn't mention pummeling, right? Pummeling isn't part of number one DPS. So there's just some things that have to happen in AQ40 that if everyone has this mindset, this is how a run gets bricked. And yeah, um, talks about how here he doesn't want to cleave his friends. Great. So yeah, main thing to understand here is you do want to kill the fakes in an average raid group. Maybe in the number one speedrun, yes, you want to kill the real one as fast as possible. That's the goal, right? In a speedrun to go as fast as possible. However, in your average raid, where your goal is to not wipe and have a clean run, I would not recommend killing the real one as the only priority. This next one here, I didn't totally agree at first, but after doing more research, 100% what he's saying here as far as you want to be heroic striking. Cleave is not worth it all. Doesn't make sense to cleave. The heal doesn't affect your parses, so yeah, definitely not the move. His call to have Zerker Rage and stand for a second in the poison, that's again things that are number one DPS mindset, and if everyone has that mindset, that's when things can get out of control more quickly. Um, so again, getting rage is really good. Getting rage makes you do more damage, and in the number one raid in the world, the goal is to do more damage because you kill targets faster, right? However, again, I just want to mention the importance of understanding that, he also says the broods don't matter to damage, so don't worry about those. Well, yeah, but like if the broods are not killed, then that's a problem, right? Um, so there's just the reality that sometimes some players may have to do things that are not number one focused and are still good gameplay, like maybe just taunt one off a healer, taunt one off a caster, that kind of stuff. So yeah, ideally maybe you'd see some AoE shots. That's what a lot of the groups are going to do that are not number one speedruns, that are less concerned about potion cooldowns and stuff like that. When that target comes out, you just have a warrior lip shout and it's super clean, or you put down some good dummies. And a mage nova can be really good as well. Like I would suggest the mage have a fear ward, stay far back, and then when the ad is coming out, just um, try and nova all the ads close. Anyways, I'm getting out of warrior gameplay here. Just to mention though, what he's saying as far as saving your intercept, great advice. But his advice here on this boss with intercept is not average gameplay advice. Um, was that an intercept in right at the start like that? Like that just seems weird to me. No, he didn't. He just charged in. You don't want to intercept on the boss. If you do that in an average group, everyone's going to yell at you. It makes the stun duration half as much for the next person that has to stun, and you just don't want to do that, right? So you really only want to be intercepting on these guards if you get knocked away. His advice as far as using cooldowns and timing of lip and stuff, I think is good. He mentions in this run he used lip earlier, and you really only want to use lip when you get down to like half health and you start getting a little bit more worried. That way you can make sure that you're getting more effective use. But it's not totally common for a ton of groups to be able to kill all the ads before a single knockback happens. So my advice is be ready to intercept back in on one of the ads before they die. Otherwise, intercepting back in on Sartura is just kind of meh. Again, just setting the expectation of like one step down. Again, I don't want to like call him out for saying things wrong because he's not. He's saying good stuff here as far as the timing of cooldowns and all that stuff, right? Typically, you want to have your death wish for the last 30 seconds of fights. Well, basically, for all these AQ40 fights, they're not much longer than 30 seconds, besides a couple of them. So you're popping cooldowns off the rip and you're just blasting. You see how he used Diamond Flash, that kind of stuff, right? Good timing with his lip where it did just end when the boss died. So, I mean, this guy's #1 DPS for a reason, right? He's doing really good gameplay, and I think he does a good job showing it. Talks about how Zerker Rage is really important here, and it's something that has high value, and I agree with all that stuff. So, my only real complaint with that boss is intercepting on the boss is kind of meh. This boss, it's hard to say anything different, right? It's just super easy boss. Um, those, never mind. Yeah, as far as like Sapper and stuff, you really don't want to be using any big things setting up for the Gigapole after Visk. But I do want to talk about Visk. I feel like that fight needs to be explained a little bit more. Not too much to mention here, though. We'll just move forward. Easy boss. On this boss, I feel like it's important to mention that you want to be in battle stance and you want to be spamming hamstring. So you see that that's what he's doing here, I think. It's a little hard for me to tell. I'm not clear from this point of view what stance he's in. Looks like he might have been in Zerker the whole time, which to me doesn't make a whole ton of sense. It allows you to have 100% of your rage going into this, which is like the goal for damage, right? Like these globs do count for damage, I think, on overall. He mentions it in the fight, but ideally you want to have your raid all in battle stance as warriors so that you're taking a little bit less damage and it's just chiller. Um, Clearly in this raid, lots of these things that I'm talking about are just a little atypical, being the #1 raid in the world. Um, and again, that allows you to have max rage, but I do just think it's one of those things that, you know, if everyone does these sort of things, it can result in that slightly more likely chance of deaths. And a lot of raids out there are not trying to be that #1 raid in the world. And if you're setting that expectation of trying to be that #1 raid in the world, you're not going to have good results. You're going to have bad times if you ignore mechanics. So as a speed run, you could like these mechanics that you're seeing, they don't matter. Like there's a stinger in the raid, and these are normally killing people. But you know, things are just getting taken care of. That's the wonderful powers of having all these buffs, right? So for a raid that has a lot of these buffs and is a little bit less of this power level, I think it's important that you focus on mechanics. What he says here makes sense, but like he says you don't want to be the closest 15 people. Well, if everyone tries to not be the closest 15 people, what's going to happen, right? Like, um, I don't think that like the Baron Peasant Caller is good for this fight. Oftentimes there's like paladins that can soak, I guess. But there's only 3 paladins in the raid, and they really do want to save their bubble for other stuff, I think. So there just has to be 15 people that are going to take damage during Enrage, and it seems like in most of these raids here on Fresh, they're killing Hoo in sub 30 seconds, which is just kind of wild. You just pop your Death Wish and rip off the bat, and yeah, if everyone has deflasts and stuff, it definitely makes it a lot safer that way too. But they pop all cooldowns at the start here on Twin Imps, and that's just, again, because like it's a short fight. But also it's a fight where there's constant times that you have downtime, and at the start here, it's the most uptime that you have, 30 seconds. So um, the threat head was not an issue at all, even though he's giga blasting with everything popped. That's the wonderful part of being on Alliance. Maybe you'd be a little bit more concerned on Horde side, but it's just interesting to see too as far as the positioning here, right? It's a little bit closer, so they don't have to teleport as far. Um, but yeah, it's just one of those things that normally you'd see a raid off to the side here where they'd be on this little like lantern is kind of the more typical spot. And again, this is the speedrun mindset. They're a little bit closer so they don't have to run quite as far. But in an average raid, if things start falling apart and the mobs get a little bit closer, they're going to start healing. So this is again just a little bit atypical in some of the stuffs that you're seeing, which I don't think is bad, but it's just important to explain that a little bit more. And yeah, um, things can always go better, and some of the things that we talk about now may be slightly modified in the future because of just how the meta changes. Um, I talked before about like this polished armor buff, how everyone's getting that now. That's something that just was not done back in 2019, right? You just never got that. So there's just some slight evolution and tweaks that come from the different meta of having full world buffs and buffs in general. Um, Old people having rank 14 gear is just such a higher power level to begin with. So, besides twins, really nothing to critique on twins, but just mentioning as far as like the positioning and that stuff goes. Thought his aura was good, explaining how um, warriors can FAP to lose threat. However, in a non-world buffed raid, if you do that, you might just die. You need to have a nature pot pre-popped for sure. This is a full world buffed warrior that's doing that, so it's much less of a concern. But again, if all warriors try and do this sandblast trick right here, it can be a little overwhelming for the healers. So it's just one of those things that if everyone has the same mindset of trying to eke out every single little bit of damage, it can get a little bit sus. Or that's how the best run becomes better, right? So it'll be interesting to see how things evolve. Like, do we see all the Eternal Warriors going and doing FAP on Oro in the future? I'm not too sure. The snowball tech is interesting. That's again an evolution from previous. So on here, it allows you to have less of a knockback, which is very interesting. But again, that less of a knockback is dangerous if a tank doesn't also then come in as well. So there's just some things that can be a little bit scary. So yeah, a bunch of warriors all dying here. You see how he puts on a shield, and I think that's a really good call out as far as being ready to be in defensive stance and put on that shield and survive. So the one thing I'll mention as far as the flip goes, like yeah, I guess it does make flip sense to flip, so um, parries and stuff aren't as bad because it's pretty easy to parry hasten that boss, I think. Feel like I've seen people get gived by it before. But oftentimes you're not like super pressed just knowing the timer on Sandblast, right? So you just have to be aware of the timer on Sandblast on this fight in general. Again, really not much to critique in terms of negativity for Cthulhu. Maybe just the fact that 3 people being stacked is not super typical in general, unless you have full world buffs. So just something to keep in mind. You're often going to have people out to the side if it's a heavy melee comp and you don't want to have a ton of people stacked because like this was just a bit of a disaster. How he mentioned how there's intercepts that happen here and intercepts can get people killed just due to the geometry of things, which I think is a really good call out. Also cool to see the snowball tech as far as you can just not get knocked away. Could intercept, but easier to target this way. So some interesting evolution, but again, I just want to keep that mindset of you need to understand your raid group, and these are some awesome tips in general, but my biggest advice is to just be realistic of your raid. Look at the time of kills of previous raids so you can understand when you should be death wishing about 30 seconds before the end of the fight. That's probably like the number one tip is just understanding your rotation and using death wish when fights are 30 seconds or less. Um, GG's.